Hi, I'm Chanel,
I'm Anne Marie.
and we're the girls of Suite 15.
Yes. And so not many people know this, but Chanel and I actually met on a Hillel trip for non-Jewish Baruch student leaders to Israel in 2017. It was a super transformative and confusing experience for us that resulted in us having many questions about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. One of the groups that we met on our trip was Roots, a grassroots movement of understanding, nonviolence, and transformation amongst both Israeli and Palestinians. So when the 2023 Israel-Hamas war broke out in October, we knew that we wanted to start an open dialogue about the history of the region and what people abroad can do to stay informed. Thus, today we are joined by Rabbi Hanan Schlesinger and Noor Awad in Suite 15. Would you guys mind just giving us a little bit of an introduction to yourselves?
My name is Noor, and I have been at Roots now for the last 7 years. I live in Bethlehem, south of Jerusalem, and I work actually as a tour guide, and that's how I found my way about for Roots actually. And since then, I have been active at Roots and a number of different joint organizations and initiatives between Israelis and Palestinians.
And my name is Hanan Schlesinger. I'm a rabbi. I'm an older guy. My career is basically behind me. I've been a rabbi and a teacher for over 35 years. And about 10 years ago, I was one of the founders of Roots, where the Israeli-Palestinian grassroots initiative for understanding nonviolence and transformation. And I spend all my days and all my nights working with Roots.
Okay, thank you. And you gave us a little bit of like the beginning of Roots. But how did it kind of start? Like, how did you get two different types of people to come together for this initiative?
Well, believe it or not, although we, Israelis and Palestinians, should be given much of the credit for coming together, we have to give some of the credit to an outside force, actually. Believe it or not, the catalyst for Roots was a Protestant evangelical pastor from Reston, Virginia, right outside of Washington, D.C. And about the year 2012, he took upon himself, in Christian terms, he was called by God, to devote himself to creating some type of reconciliation between Israelis and Palestinians. And he decided to take upon himself a Christian ministry in which twice a year, 2012 twice a year, 2013 twice a year, he traveled from the US to Israel, Palestine, and he began to meet people, Israelis and Palestinians who lived in the same geographical area south of Jerusalem, and introduce them to each other. get to know them deeply. He met Palestinians from the city of Bethlehem and from other areas in that area of the Palestinian territories. And he also met Israelis living in that area. Israeli Jews call the area Judea and Samaria. The specific area of Judea and Samaria that he went to, that Pastor John Moyle went to, was what we call Gush Etzion. And after he had 4 trips to the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, at the beginning of 2014, on his 5th trip, he decided he had met enough people to introduce them all to each other. And he wanted to put together a gathering of all the people. On the Palestinian side, his main partner was Ali Abu Awad. And on the Israeli side, his main partner was Shaul Judelman and some other Israelis. I won't mention all the names. And he brought them all together. And I happened to be there. I'd never met the pastor before. I'd never met a Palestinian before. I just got in at the last minute, and it changed my life.
Oh, wow. That's pretty incredible. That's something I did not know at all.
And so what is the mission of Roots, and do you think that you can achieve it?
So I think I can say that our mission is actually to bring as many Israelis and Palestinians, local people actually, to get to meet one another, to listen to the different narrative from the other side, to start to understand that there is a truth on both sides, on both identities, on both the Israeli and the Palestinian side, and to take this understanding and, in a way, change the way how they see their identity and the way how they see the other side. In our conflict, unfortunately, there's a lot of denial between both sides, and the identities and the narrative seems like they are contradicting each other. And Roots is aiming to basically not build one narrative, but rather to actually create a space where both sides can actually maintain their identities, their narrative, but in a way that still recognizes and sees the other side and acknowledge the other side. And we hope that when we create a mass number of people who actually go through such a transformation, it will be then we will be able to reach for a sustainable peace.
So to make a long story short, Israelis and Palestinians live in the West Bank, what as a Jew I call Judea and Samaria, in two parallel universes with no connection between us. Transportation is separate, health systems are separate, education is separate, commerce is separate. We live in different towns and villages, we speak different languages, no interaction. So we have ignorance of the other side, and we have suspicion, we have fear, we have hostility because we have racism and bias. Roots created in that context the only joint space between the two sides. Our Dignity Center is a community center, the only joint Israeli-Palestinian community center in the whole West Bank, Judea and Samaria. And there, until October 7th, we had activities like photography workshops and music therapy and playback and storytelling and interfaith dialogue and religious celebrations and political discussions, learning the other's language, culture, etc., etc., etc. The two sides got to know each other a little bit, got to know the humanity of the side, and got to dig deeper into the identity of the other side.
No, because I also seen that, like you said, you have like the summer camps for the kids, and I also seen there was like the marathons that you were holding. So how do you actually get people from the different parts to come together, especially when they don't speak the same language and where it could be like out of the way or new territory for someone?
So it's really, as we said earlier, it's going against the grain for both societies. Some people come out of curiosity. Some people come, they don't want to live in hate of the other side, they tell us. Some parents come after they sent their kids to the summer camp and saw how wonderful it was. There are people who come, they're not willing to meet the other side. Let's say Israelis not willing to meet Palestinians, but they're willing to meet Muslims. Again, it's the same thing, but you phrase it in a religious context that takes the political thorn out of it. So there's a lot of Jews who come to our religious events to talk to Muslims, to meet Muslims. But in general, it's hard to get people to come. It's not the easiest thing.
Sometimes there are some people who are like, in a way, self-motivated because they feel like by coming and meeting the other side, they would be maybe challenging themselves, and they have made the choice to do that. And so there are people like this, and I'm sure that this is something I felt after going to Roots for the first time and the second time, and I start to go after that. The more you go and the more you get involved, you actually start to feel liberated in some sense. Liberated from this ignorance, from the prejudices that you have, from ignorance, and from maybe also even hatred, and all of these things that you didn't think about. But when you start to meet people and you start, as I'm like using the words of Rabbi Hanan, you start to go through this healing process. It does actually attract people to go more and more, and actually combine this with curiosity. People are curious, and as long as they feel safe, to a certain degree, to a certain level, they will come.
And was there any backlash when you created Roots, or was this kind of an idea that was really welcomed in the communities that you're in?
No backlash at all. Everyone loved it.
That would be nice.
So you're hinting to the fact that in the environment in which we live, both for Israelis and Palestinians, to accept the other side, that the other side has complete humanity, that the other side is connected to the land, that the other side has a legitimacy, that goes against the grain of what both Israelis and Palestinians are thinking and feeling and experiencing. So indeed, the message of Roots is revolutionary in our environment. It's countercultural, and we find a lot of opposition on both sides, Israeli and Palestinian.
Yeah, I would say also that one of the unique things about Roots is that it created a space of dialogue and understanding among Palestinians and Israeli settlers in the West Bank, in some parts of the West Bank, and that is considered to be very new when Roots started, because most of the organizations in the last 30 years since the Oslo peace process started, the communities in the West Bank, such as the settlers, were not really part of the peace dialogue, and they were seen as the obstacle, and they were mostly dealt with. Basically, they were ignored. Also, religious people. I can say that religious people also felt that the Oslo peace process did not really talk to them, did not really respect their beliefs and the way how they relate to the Holy Land. So that makes Roots focusing on these groups makes it unique and actually doing something that peace organizations did not do before.
Yeah, the fact that Roots focuses on religious people from traditional groups is really unique. Most peace organizations focus on secular people. And the truth is that makes perfect sense, at least in our context, because where we come from, both on the Israeli Jewish side and on the Palestinian Muslim side, the more religious you are, the more traditional you are, the more you, to use the word that Noor used, deny the other side. The more you feel that the truth is only with you and the other side is illegitimate and doesn't belong here. So Roots has said that it's true that religion is part of the problem. Yes, it's true. We're not denying that. So let's make it part of the solution. Let's bring the religious people into the dialogue, and let's focus very often on religious themes in our dialogue. Let's see the depth and the fullness of the political, national, religious identity on our side and on the other side. And let's see if we can find an opening that will allow religion to be part of the solution. Actually, let me tell you a story. Can I tell you a story about this thing you asked how we've been received? So this past summer, like 4 months ago, we had our, I think, 9th annual summer camp for 80 kids, half Israeli, half Palestinian, elementary school kids. And I publicized it on the email list in the settlement in the town in which I live. The town I live is called Alon Shvut. And some kids, some families joined, but on the email list, there was a discussion. And the discussion was that many people wrote, in the end, it was 8 or 9 people wrote that Hanan is crazy. What is he doing, inviting our kids to meet Palestinian kids? They'll become friends and they'll marry each other. That's the worst thing in the world. We'll find that the Palestinian young men are taking Jewish girls and they're marrying them and bring them into the neighboring village where we know they'll be beaten and tortured by their husbands. Life will be terrible for them. They'll be captured, and then we'll have to send forces into the village and save them from there. So what is Hanan doing? This is a terrible, terrible thing, this summer camp for 5-year-old and 7-year-old kids. I read what they were writing, and I didn't respond. And then the next day I got a phone call from the rabbi of our town, who's a man I greatly respect. And in our circumstances, the rabbi is greatly respected by everyone, and he gets involved in a lot of social issues between the inhabitants. So he said that he was called by a number of inhabitants, citizens of Alon Shvut, again, the town where I live, and they said they have great concern about the summer camp. The people asked him to investigate. So he said, why don't you come over to my house tomorrow and we'll talk about it. So I said, I have a better idea. Instead of me coming to your house, I'll invite you to my house. When I said my house, I meant the Root Summer Camp, where we have it's like my second home. He said, okay, I'll come. So the next morning I picked him up in my car. We got there. It's a 5-minute drive from where we live. And he saw 80 kids having fun. Israeli and Palestinian, talking, not talking to each other. They can't talk. They have different languages, but playing together, having fun together and laughing together. I introduced him to some of the counselors, 3 or 4 Palestinian counselors. He talked to them in English. He heard how they got to Roots and what it's meant in their lives and how much they love the summer camp. He talked to a few of the kids, and then I introduced him to the 2 co-leaders of Roots, the Israeli leader Shol Yudelman and the Palestinian leader Khaled Abu Awad. He sat with me and the 2 co-leaders for about an hour. He asked many, many questions. And then at the end of the conversation, he said, "That's it, I'm on your side. This is wonderful. I can't believe that it's been going on for 8, 9 years. I never heard of it. Why did you keep this a secret? We have to tell the whole world. This is exactly what we need for the 2 sides to meet each other." And he said he's going to bring all the rabbis of the area to our center, and he's going to go back to the people who sent him to investigate and tell them that their fears and their apprehensions were totally off base. It's a very good story, and it's all true, but the problem is that the rabbi was never able to do what he said he's going to do. Here's the bad part of it. It was at the end of the summer. He went on vacation. Then came the Jewish holidays. And then came October 7th, the last day of the Jewish holidays. The war broke out. And I don't think he's ever going to be able to bring the great news to the community, to the Jewish community, because everyone is just so traumatized and so afraid now and has lost any little bit of trust in the other side.
And so obviously the conflict has been ongoing since the creation of the state of Israel in 1948. So what makes this attack on October 7th different? And what do you think like people abroad should know about it?
I think you are going to hear different answers from Palestinians and Israelis, even at Roots. I think one of the things that made this this conflict since the 7th of October different is that this time actually the amount of casualties and the attack on the Israeli side was maybe bigger and different than any other time. I mean, we witnessed several wars before between Hamas and Israel, but not like this one, not that intense. And I think that the attack that Hamas committed on the 7th of October was very surprising and shocking, almost for everyone, including for the Palestinian public. Many found it to be actually surprising and shocking. So that's what's different this time.
I'd add, and not disagreeing with Noor at all, that Israelis, despite the conflict, had a sense until October 7th, a sense of security, a sense of self-sufficiency, that we can and do defend ourselves. And Jews may be victims around the world, they may be hopeless around the world, but in the state of Israel, we can defend ourselves. On October 7th, that sense of security, of self-sufficiency, was utterly shattered. It's not just that Hamas attacked and we were caught off guard. It's that the Israeli public, through the radio and through television, through newspapers, were exposed to the painful truth that for a full day, Saturday, October 7th, there were Jews calling on the phone and on WhatsApp their relatives and their friends, "Help! I'm hiding in the middle of the desert at the party. I'm hiding in my safe room. I hear Hamas outside trying to break in. I hear Hamas looking for me in the bushes. Come help me." And no one came. What do I mean no one came? We weren't prepared. It was a holiday. The army, the forces weren't ready. And we literally heard stories of people begging for help for hour upon hour and hour, and then they were slaughtered. And there's a great sense in Israel that we, the country, we, the government, we, the army, have let our people down. And we are embarrassed and feel deep, deep shame. We feel, so many Jews in Israel feel and experience flashbacks to the Holocaust, in which Jews went like sheep to the slaughter. No one came to save us. We thought in the state of Israel, we have created a framework that will save us from onslaughts. We may be attacked, but we can always defend ourselves. And it turns out that we were wrong. There's a deep sense that our basic identity and our basic sense of self-sufficiency has been utterly, utterly undone.
Actually, I can also add, I mean, your question as basic as basic as it sounds, actually, it's very deep at the same time. Because, yeah, I mean, like, the conflict had been going on since 1948. What's different now? And I can really think of so many things. Like, one of it on the Palestinian side is that we feel that the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, had been really successfully managing the conflict for the last decade, at least, and have convinced, to a large degree, I can say, the Israeli public that, you know, I can make peace with the Arab countries, with the Arab neighbors. There is no partner on the Palestinian side. We offer them peace many times and they rejected. And there are ways, we find ways to manage the conflict. The Palestinian Authority is keeping the situation in the West Bank under control. And yes, there are attacks from time to time, but it's still under control. It's not that big, and it's not that bad. And with the same thing, actually, the same thing in Gaza. I mean, even Hamas is actually had like a very bad relationship to Israel. I mean, like, they have wars, but still, at least in the last couple of years, the Israeli government have managed to convince, I think, the Israeli public that, you know, Hamas is not really interested into having another war and waging another war against Israel. And all of what they are really interested in now is to run Gaza, since they are the government there, the de facto government. And they are not really going to take any risk and attack Israel. And I don't think that most Palestinians really believe this Israeli also narrative. I mean, I was one of, like, really the Palestinians who questioned. We witnessed last year another cycle of violence, and it was basically between the Islamic Jihad, which is another movement, another organization in Gaza, and Israel, in where Hamas did not actually participate. And the Israeli media have used this as a sign to actually say that, yes, Hamas is the government in Gaza, and it's not interested in having wars with Israel, but rather to maintain the situation and to have economic benefits. But that was all proven wrong on the 7th of October. And I think, in a way, that's one of the reasons why it created a big shock for the Israeli community.
Yeah, I think it's also very important how you talked about the media and kind of how sometimes politics play a role in how maybe one side will view something compared to another side. Of course, there's this phrase like fake news. So what kind of ways do you think that the information being shared, either on both sides, are affecting the views of the people living in Israel, living in Palestine?
Okay, I'll say something. One thing I can tell you is that Israelis and Palestinians read and hear different news. I mean, different news about the same situation. In Israel, we hear almost nothing about the humanitarian situation in Gaza. We hear on the news the number of casualties in Gaza, but there's always a caveat that these are the casualty figures put forth by the Gazan Health Ministry, and the health ministry is in the hands of Hamas, so you can't believe a word they're saying. And number two, we are only told in the Israeli news the number of casualties, but there's no human face to it. There's no pictures, of people dying in Gaza. There's no pictures of arms and limbs flying all over from a bomb dropped by my country's Air Force. All we see of the human story is the Israeli human story. We see the Israeli human story because it's on the news, the soldier that was killed. And it's also in our lives because just about every family has someone who's been called up. Literally almost every family, right? The Israeli army is based on, it's a people's army. It's based on the reserves. It's not based on a standing army. So everyone knows someone has been called up. Everyone's been to funerals in the past 2 months. Everyone knows women who are left at home with 2 or 3 or 4 children and their husbands been away for a month at the front. So we feel the pain of our side, and we know nothing of the pain on the Palestinian side. And it could be, I'll leave Noor to say, it could be that the Palestinian side is a mirror image of that.
Yeah, that's very true. Like, for example, I find myself to be sometimes between both sides, between my society and the other society. And I have friends from the Israeli side, and I talk to them despite this was like really very difficult time. And the stories that I hear from them from the Israeli side about what happened on the 7th of October, there is no way that most of the Palestinians hear about these things. Now, I'm not saying that everything I hear I think is true, but the issue is that the Palestinians only hear about our stories, our atrocities, what happens to us, and in general, for us, the Israelis are the victimizer. And basically, when we think of the Israeli side, we only think of the Israeli military, of what they are doing to us, of the bombs, of these things, and we barely think of most of the Palestinians don't think of humans on the other side. I think that in this war, most Palestinians have seen the Israeli reaction to it, and they have seen this ugly image of revenge and bloodshed. Like even if you wanted to have even if you wanted as a Palestinian to start to basically, I don't know, to try to find empathy with the other side, after several days of the war, it became so difficult because the things that Israel is committing in Gaza, and Palestinians, of course, they hear the Israeli side justifications, but we don't buy it. We heard it many times before. We don't think it's true, and so yeah, it's exactly on the Palestinian side. It's the same.
And I wanted to ask a little bit about Hamas. I just want to know, how do Palestinian people feel about Hamas, and also how does Hamas govern different Palestinian territories?
So, I mean, yeah, we can talk a lot about Hamas, but Hamas was founded actually in the end of the first Intifada, the end of the first Palestinian uprising in the 80s. And unlike most of the Palestinian political organizations back then, that they were all under the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO, Hamas was actually an Islamist movement. Most of the organizations that were before are a social democratic, such as Fatah, and also some of them were even like communist groups, like the PFLP, for example. And Hamas was founded basically in Israeli jails by prisoners, Palestinian prisoners, political prisoners, and many of them were part or members of the Muslim Brotherhood movement in the Arab world. So Hamas was at the beginning the branch of the Muslim Brotherhood in Palestine. Now, I'm going to say something here that might sound like a conspiracy theory, but actually it's true. Hamas was founded by Israel. And what I mean by that is that the Israeli Shabak, the Israeli internal intelligence here, they were aware about what these people are and who they are. But the fact that they turned a blind eye on them is because they wanted to create a political opposition to the PLO. And that was just a few years before the Oslo peace agreements were signed. And actually, they succeeded. I mean, when the Palestinian Authority was founded and the elections took place in 1996, Hamas was already an established political organization and movement in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza. they worked on a lot of like social projects, schools and kindergartens and clinics and health centers, and they start to spread, their movement, and people joined them. And they were, in general, like the situation in Palestine back then was affected, like most of the Arab world, with the Islamic Revolution in Iran after 1979, right? So that's how Hamas started to grow. And it played, in my opinion, as Noor, a very negative role in the 90s, because when the PLO decided to go toward peace and start to build or establish a state, they went the other direction. They said, we are not going to give up on armed struggle. We are not going to give up on resistance. We are not going to recognize the state of Israel, meaning we are not going to give up on 78% of our historic homeland between the sea and the river. And another important thing, that they are representing religious voices, which is, as I hinted before, the Oslo peace process did not really speak a lot to the religious people. So that's a little bit of history about Hamas, and basically after the Second Intifada and after the failure of the Oslo peace process in the Second Intifada, and things got even more complicated, Hamas even got more popularity because they were showing that they are the right answer to the occupation. Because as long as there is occupation, we need resistance, and of course, militant resistance is the most effective. Now, I said something that I think that they were negative in the 90s because every action that Hamas did in the 90s, such as the bomb suiciding attacks, actually, that began in the 90s and even became more intense in the Second Intifada in the early 2000s, destroyed the trust completely between the Israelis and the Palestinian side. I think that that's one of the major things that the way how they affected the situation. By 2006, we had the chance to have our second elections. That we were supposed to have these elections in the year 2000, but we could not because of the Second Intifada. So Hamas actually, surprisingly, won. They actually decided to run in the elections, and they managed to actually get 75 seats in the Palestinian parliament from 120 seats. And the elections took place in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip. And so that's how Hamas came to power, and they founded the government, which was boycotted by most of the world, including Israel, of course. And that made things very, very complicated until the president decided to dismantle the government. And to make a long story short, they made a coup, and basically the Palestinian political situation became divided between the two major political forces or political parties, Fatah in the West Bank and Hamas in Gaza. Each side is claiming or actually accusing the other side of not respecting the result of democratic elections. And most of the world decided to recognize and continue to work with the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank that's led by Fatah, even though there's no elections since then.
I wanted to also ask about the agreements that happen between Israel and Palestine. It feels like every few years there's another uprising that happens or another conflict that happens, and there'll be an agreement, but then sooner or later there is like one or the other party breaks this agreement. In your opinion, like why could this be a case? And how, I don't know, of course you can answer this because you can't speak for one party or the other, but how can you probably see a way forward to us kind of creating agreements that could be lasting?
I'll say something that relates to the specific approach of our organization. So my analysis is not a global analysis. I'm just examining one part of things. So one of the reasons why agreements have been signed and broken, haven't been implemented, one of the reasons is because of a lack of trust. That the Israelis don't trust the Palestinians don't trust the Israelis. And the reason I highlight that is because trust is not just an issue among the politicians, it's an issue among the people. The politicians, my politicians, Israeli politicians, don't trust the Palestinians because all of Israeli society doesn't trust the Palestinians. On the Palestinian side, it may be the same. Noor can comment upon that. I'm not sure. So in Roots, we've said again and again and again, this is one of our major points, is that yes, there is a political conflict between Israel and Palestine. Yes, there is occupation, Israeli occupation of the Palestinians. Yes, there is injustice of Israel vis-a-vis the Palestinians. Yes, we need a political settlement, which Palestinians get their own state. Yes to all those things, but it won't happen. There won't be a politically negotiated settlement without trust. And in order to establish trust, you need people-to-people work. You need Israelis and Palestinians meeting each other and coming to humanize the other and coming to recognize the other's legitimate identity and connection to the land. You have to feel that they're people, and that you can work with them, and that we can build some type of relationship, but that we can turn from enemies into, to a certain degree, partners. Any peace settlement is based on some degree of mutual acceptance, recognition, and trust. So Roots has been working on those grassroots issues for 10 years. And I have to say, what's obvious is that the events of October 7th and what's happened since then clearly have set us back decades.
So I want to say that when you talk about the Israeli-Palestinian side having an agreement, actually the last agreement, the last like really big agreement that the Israeli and Palestinian side had was the Oslo Agreement 30 years ago. Since then, I cannot really say that we had an agreement about anything. We had rounds of negotiations. And on the Palestinian side, we think that what happened was that the Israelis actually have no interest in peace and have no interest completely in establishing a Palestinian state and ending the occupation. And as I said before, Benjamin Netanyahu was successfully for the last decade actually managing the conflict and taking any chance to like destroy the hope for a Palestinian state. And most Palestinians think that on one hand, yes, we cannot trust the Israelis, but on the other hand, that the Israelis are never are held accountable, right? And there's here an issue when it comes to having an agreement because there is always a mediator. And for the last 30 years, the US had been the peace mediator between the Israeli side and the Palestinian side. But the type of relationship that the United States have toward Israel versus the Palestinian side is completely different. And the US would never, in the Palestinian point of view, had never actually held Israel accountable and is not really ready to put enough pressure on Israel to make the concessions for an agreement. So yes, there is an issue that today Palestinians have no trust in the Israelis. For example, like in this war in Gaza, the Palestinians believe, and this is something that was repeated by Joe Biden, the American president himself, that the ultimate goal of the war in Gaza is not to destroy Hamas, but rather to force the Palestinian population out to the Sinai Desert to Egypt. And even though it was said at some point that they wanted to send the people there, meaning the Palestinian population, because large parts of Gaza will become a military zone or a military action area, but no Palestinian believe that if we actually left Palestine, we'll be able to go back. And that has to do with the inherited trauma of the catastrophe of 1948. Palestinians left and they thought it would be just a matter of few days or weeks. And after 75 years, they were not allowed to come back. So yes, there is no trust. And in our grassroots work, one of the things we work on is like to create the trust between the people. But at the end, I must say that I don't think that we are going to create a trust between every Palestinian and every Israeli. I think that's impossible. But we do need we do need a level of trust between both parties on the ground level and on the political level in order to make an agreement.
I want to push back on something that Noor said. I don't understand. What did you say that the U.S. president agreed that the Israeli goal of the war is to push the Palestinians out of Gaza? Is that what you said?
So the American president actually have talked to the Egyptian president in order to convince him to receive people from Gaza, which actually confirmed the Palestinian accusations to Israel that the goal of Israel for the Gazans or for the people of Gaza is to take the people of Gaza out from Gaza and send them to Egypt. And this is not a new idea. This is not something that's totally new. It was always, I mean, on the strategic level, it was always a problem. Gaza is actually not that big area. It's a strip by the Mediterranean Sea. It's about, if I'm not mistaken, it's 120 square miles, about 360 square kilometers. It's double the size of Washington, D.C., with over 2 million people living there. So it's one of the most dense populated areas in the world. 80% of the population of Gaza are refugees and their descendants, the second and third generation. They actually come from the area that's now Israel, the state of Israel, mostly from Jaffa, from around Jaffa, the villages that were there before 1948, from Ashdod, from Asqalan, or as we call it in the Palestinian name, Al-Majdal, from those cities, and many villages to the north and to the northeast of the Gaza Strip. And the idea of pushing Gazans, so Gaza is like, in the Palestinian perspective, is this large refugee camp, basically. So the idea of pushing Gazans outside of the borders of historic Palestine had been always there and had been always one of the major Palestinian fears. And I remember that, on the 7th of October, at night, the Israeli Prime Minister, Netanyahu, came out to address the Israeli public, and he actually made his threats to Hamas, and he said, I advise the Palestinians to leave. And I was like, where they should go, where they should leave, because everyone knows that for the last 16 years, Gaza is like this open-air prison that is really under this blockade and siege. No one can go in or go out easily. Gaza is like 2 hours away from me here in Bethlehem, but I never, ever had the chance to go there. And I never even think that in the future I have a chance to visit Gaza because of how separated we are. And it was repeated again that the Gazans should leave, but it wasn't clear until there was a talk about it. Yes, and the American President Joe Biden, he said that he was trying to convince the Egyptian president to allow the people of Gaza to come to go to Egypt, which is something that Palestinians basically refuse for the reasons I said before.
And so you mentioned there's a lot of distrust on both sides. Obviously, everybody's experienced a tragedy, whether you're Israeli or Palestinian. So how do you feel, like, how can people actually sit down and find that motivation to talk with one another? How do you think people can put aside their bias to have an open discussion with somebody who's on the other side?
Well, when you ask about motivation, their motivation could be on the rational level, and motivation could be on the emotional level. That's in general. So it looks like presently, among most Israelis, the vast majority of them, and even peace activists, certainly the majority of peace activists within Roots on the Israeli side, people now don't have the motivation to sit down with the other side. And when I say don't have the motivation, I mean on the emotional level. I mean that people are just traumatized and shocked and horrified, and they've lost the foundation of their sense of self. I used the word shame earlier, that many Israelis feel shame And when you're ashamed in the face of the other, you usually don't want to see them. I'm not justifying this. I'm just trying to explain it. In addition to the trauma and the shame, Israelis, even peace activists today, don't want to meet Palestinians because they're afraid. They're afraid that people they've been meeting for the last year or 2 or 3 are going to stab them in the back. And again, I'm not justifying that feeling. I'm just explaining that's what people are feeling. That's on the emotional level. But on the rational level, I think that Israelis, certainly people who have been peace activists, understand that eventually we have to sit down and talk to the other side. If we don't do that, we will end up killing each other for another decade or 5 decades or century or centuries. Because although many Israelis and many Palestinians outside of the peace camp are convinced that one day the other side is just going to leave the land, the other side doesn't belong here, it's ours and not theirs, they'll get the message and leave. But anyone who's met the other side in Roots or in other organizations has learned that that's not going to happen, because the other side has a deep sense that they belong in this land just as we do. They're not going anywhere. No one's going anywhere. Jewish Israelis and Palestinians are destined to live in the same land for a long time. The question is, at war and peace. So if you know that the other side is staying here because they belong here, obviously we don't want to continue living in war. So eventually we have to talk to them, and we have to come to a certain understanding. That's only going to happen through face-to-face meetings, developing recognition and trust, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So how do we get people to the point which they're willing to talk to the other side? I actually think that's the multi-million-dollar question now. How do we get the question existed before October 7th, and now it exists even more deeper. Part of the answer, and again, this is really hard, I don't have the answer. Part of the answer is trauma therapy. Trauma therapy that begins with Israelis alone and Palestinians alone, and is geared to creating joint trauma therapy in which we can have sessions after the separate sessions together, Israelis and Palestinians together. I don't have the answers.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult to try to bring the people to talk to each other now. I agree with Rabbi Hanan. Yet I think as activists in this field, I feel like I have responsibility. I can't just like give up on it. And I don't think that I have the answer, but I tried. I'm still trying. I thought at the beginning that, for example, we might, as Roots, issue a joint statement that shows that we stand together as partners against this violence, against the violence on both sides, against these atrocities that they are being committed, and to show to the people in our community where we are standing and that we have partners on either side. It was not that easy to come up with a joint statement and to write it. Some other groups actually have, and I think it was needed and it was powerful. It gave some hope, even for me, to actually read a statement from other groups in the field. And then I thought that we can actually have maybe after the emotions go down, we can have actually some time, and we can have like a rational discussion about what's happening and what's happening, and what should we do, what should we say. But I think I was too quick, because the emotions did not come down very quickly on both sides. On the Israeli side, even after a week or 2 weeks of the 7th of October, people are still hearing about the stories, about what happened, and also thinking about the kidnapped, the people who are in captivity in Gaza, and the stories of their family or their families. On the Palestinian side, we see the massacres that's happening in Gaza, and our emotions are getting very angry So yeah, it became more and more difficult. One of the things that I found myself doing in the last couple of weeks is actually meeting with other Palestinians who are involved in this work. And first of all, we started by sharing what we are feeling about the situation and the challenges that we are facing. And it was very similar, actually. And then we start to basically to do a brainstorming around what can we do and what is possible right now. And many of us came to a conclusion that maybe right now we should be focusing more on creating a new political horizon. And instead of actually thinking of the people-to-people work, which is actually impossible even because I cannot leave Bethlehem where I live. I cannot go to the Roots Center. So maybe we can actually think of political ideas.
So explain why you can't go. Explain why you can't go.
Yeah, so since the war began, the Israeli military in the West Bank closed Palestinian cities and villages, and at the beginning it prevented any Palestinian traffic on the main road. And the idea was to separate also between Palestinians and Israeli settlers in order to basically avoid any escalation or any violence that will escalate the situation in the West Bank. But this situation turned into a kind of siege. Like the city of Bethlehem, all of the entrances to the city are closed. And there is only two roads are left open today in Bethlehem, one in the direction of the south. And that's where is the Roots Center today. But there is a military checkpoint you have to pass, and they check every car, and that creates like traffic. And people are even also afraid to go because they hear about stories being attacked by settlers or by soldiers themselves. So most people don't leave Bethlehem unless they have to, like unless there is something that is really necessary. Otherwise, people do not leave the city. So that's why I can go. So right now, I mean, we start to think that maybe we should focus on the political level, not on the grassroots level, but maybe on a political level. But definitely, yes, the answer is it's very difficult to try to bring the people to talk to each other right now.
I want to add something. On the Israeli side, there's also talk. I mean, on the Israeli side of Roots, there's also talk, like Noor just said on the Palestinian side, that perhaps people-to-people work is so difficult. Perhaps, yes, we should focus more on the political level. But I also did want to add 2 points about how do we jumpstart or how do we continue the people-to-people work. One is, instead of having groups of Israelis meet groups of Palestinians in public, 5 Israelis, 5 Palestinians, or 10 and 10, or 15 and 15, instead of having group events to bring the two sides together, having events in which one Israeli talks to a group of Palestinians, or one Palestinian talks to a group of Israelis. And for the speaker, we choose people who know the language to use in order not to trigger the other side. And that's something that most Israelis and most Palestinians don't know. We're afraid that if we go back to people meetings, first of all, no one will come. But if they do come, they'll immediately say something wrong and trigger the other side. And then it'll explode. I don't mean explode physically with a bomb, explode. So that's one idea, to have meetings in which one person speaks from one side to the other side, to a group of the other side. Another idea is that today, Israelis know, or think they know, that it was a radical religious movement that massacred us on October 7th. Hamas, it was an Islamic movement. And therefore, Islam is the problem. That's what many Israelis are feeling. So if Islam is the problem in the eyes of Israelis, then either there's no hope, or the hope is in reform of Islam. And by the way, some Israelis realize that part of the problem in this conflict is not just with Islam, it's also with Judaism, that there's elements in Judaism that are fueling this conflict. I say this because we've always found in Roots that interfaith dialogue is a very good means to bring people to meet the other side. Let me explain. When you tell Israelis, come and meet Palestinians, it sounds political and it sounds dangerous. Many won't come. If you say, come and meet Muslims, it's easier, even though it's the same people you're meeting. I don't know if it's similar on the Palestinian side. So the interfaith dialogue was a lot of activity before October 7th. It drew a lot of people, whether dialogue over texts or dialogue talking about customs or just religious celebrations of one side or the other side's holidays. In the present situation, which Israelis are so sure that Islam has been corrupted by Hamas and has to be changed, well, Israelis may be able to understand the interfaith dialogue in which we Jews show a mirror to Muslims, and they may see how Hamas went wrong in its interpretation of Islam. That could be a way to convince or influence Israelis that it's important to meet the other side now, because it'll help them to quote unquote reform their religion, and that's good for everyone. Now, I just want to add that I understand that I used patronizing language in the last 2 minutes, but I did on purpose, because if patronizing language will bring people to the table, then I'm willing to use that language. You want to object to something I said?
Oh no, for me, or
Actually,
no.
I said to Noor.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually want to clarify something. I think when Israelis focus on Hamas this much and think of the religiosity, or that Hamas is a religious movement, and talking about the issue of Islam, it's, to me, in a way, saying that the Israelis are thinking that the issue is about anti-Semitism. It's about religion, and it's about hatred that's in faith or in ideology, and that's a religious ideology, and that's not only the problem. Now, I think that there is a problem with the Islamist movements, and that's not only in Palestine, but across the Arab and the Muslim world. And that had an impact in Palestine, it had impact in the Arab world, and it had impact in the entire world. But to basically think about it only this way is a bit misleading, because at the end of the day, Hamas is an Islamic and national movement. It's a Palestinian movement. And it's basically saying that against the PLO actually took the path of diplomacy in the 90s, and they chose diplomacy over violence and international law. And that's what will bring Palestinian freedom and liberation. And unfortunately, they failed to achieve that until now. And Hamas is saying that only with us as Palestinian nation rising up and fighting for our freedom, there will be no freedom. And from my experience in the last 7 years at Roots and also outside of Roots, meeting Israelis and getting to know the Israeli society, I have met a few Israelis who actually have heard a Palestinian and have understood what the Palestinian cause or what the Palestinian national struggle is. And to be fair, I do understand sometimes it's confusing, because before the Oslo peace process, we, the Palestinians, we were saying that, the Israelis have no connection to this land. The Zionist movement was a European colonial movement. They brought Jews from Europe. They colonized our land. They have no home. They have no place in our land. And we want to take back our land from the river to the sea. Palestine will be free. That's what the Palestinian liberation movement and the liberation vision was before the Oslo Agreement, right? But then there was the Oslo Agreement and the vision for the two-state solution. And it made a shift, whether we like it or not on the Palestinian side, it made some shift. And we start to think about to have a state, not on all of the historic land of Palestine, but on parts of it. So there are organizations and individuals on the Israeli side who do understand this part of the Palestinian struggle. They even actually advocate for it, and they even join forces sometimes with Palestinians in resisting the occupation. But most of the Israeli public is actually ignorant about what the occupation is. They think it's just Israeli forces keeping security in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem, and that, as I said before, Palestinian leadership have rejected offers for peace that Israel gave, like all the time, generous offers for peace. And So that there is no maybe cause, or there is nothing logical on the Palestinian side when they are actually doing what they are doing. And I know that there is also very problematic. Being a member of an organization that's actually taking nonviolence as a very essential principle, like a very important principle, that we are trying to change this reality in nonviolent ways. And the concept of militant resistance, or the concept that Hamas is following, that actually we are fighting for, in their eyes, they are fighting for peace because they are fighting for the liberation at the end. Now, of course, we can talk also specifically about Hamas itself and what's their vision of a Palestinian state and what's their vision to the land. Because Hamas, even though they have accepted in 2015 the concept of a Palestinian state in consideration or within the international resolutions and in the 1967 lines, but they said that they will never recognize Israel. And yeah, it's. I don't think that. Yeah, I think that there is a problem when we come to talk about anti-Semitism. If we talk about it if it's only like if people use it as the explanation for what's going on, and for sure, I would say that in my experience, because I'm in the Palestinian society and I was also in the Israeli society, for sure there is hatred for the other side. I mean, if you come from outside, you can see immediately, maybe you can sense this level of racism between both sides, the hatred. But in the eyes of the people here, it's a hatred of the enemy. I can tell you that for sure, like after learning about anti-Semitism, you can see there is anti-Semitism within the Palestinian society. When you actually go, I was once in a settlement in the West Bank, and there was a bookshop, and I went to the bookshop, and many of the books that I saw there on the shelf was actually spreading Islamophobia, was Islamophobic, and there's also racism on the Israeli Jewish side towards Arabs and towards Muslims. So, but that is this hatred that exists here is because it's hatred between enemies. It's part of the problem, but it's not the roots of the problem.
I wanted to ask a bit I mean, of course, where this hate comes from, it makes sense, especially with the history. But when you're having dialogues like intergenerationally, like if you speak with your grandparents or great-grandparents or people who either witnessed the Holocaust or experienced it, and then for the Palestinian side, there was the people who experienced this as well. Like, this is deeply rooted within the history, and especially dealing with the land, like people have deep roots here. How does the conversation with like grandparents and family members who have experienced this trauma influence kind of the way that you view life nowadays and have these conversations within your peers?
I'll tell you that the Holocaust is central to Jewish identity around the world, and it's super central to Jewish identity in the state of Israel. And it's not just the Holocaust, it's actually almost 2,000 years of anti-Semitism that Jews remember, whether we're talking about the Crusades in which thousands of Jews were slaughtered by the Crusader armies on the way to the Holy Land, whether we're talking about the expulsion from Spain in 1492 or from 3 or 4 other European countries right after that, whether we're talking about the Chmielnicki massacres and the pogroms in the 19th and early 20th centuries in Eastern Europe, Jews literally live with the fears and the traumas of those events of almost 2 millennia. It's not always conscious, but it's really in our bones and in our DNA. There's a sense, and I hinted to this a little bit earlier, of deep insecurity, that there's always an enemy around the corner, and that we created the state of Israel in order to provide ourselves with a certain degree of security, that we won't go to like sheep to the slaughter, We won't be completely vulnerable. Actually, there's a saying that we Jews have that we say at the Passover Seder, the Passover celebration. And in English, it goes like this. In every generation, they stand against us to annihilate us, but God has saved us. And it's become a very popular song. It's on the radio all the time in Israel. And it's a statement also made by the Prime Minister Netanyahu many, many times. And I'll tell you that we in Israeli education, Jewish Israeli education, we reinforce this trauma through, among other things, Holocaust education. It's one of the central elements of high school education in Israel for Jewish kids. And the center of Holocaust education is March of the Living, in which just about every Israeli Jewish high school student spends a week in Eastern Europe in the remains of the concentration camps and the death camps. So it's seared in our consciousness. I want to tell you a story. Two of our Palestinian partners in Roots told me the same thing. These two Palestinians, I won't mention their names, did a very brave thing. In different frameworks, they went themselves on a version of March of the Living. They went to the death camps in Germany and in Poland to try and experience or understand what the Jews feel in their consciousness about the Holocaust. And these two Palestinians told me that when they went to the death camps with some other Palestinians and internationals, there were many, many Israeli high school groups around them while they were there visiting the camps. And one of the Palestinians knows Hebrew. And he said to me, Hanan, I heard what was being told to the high school kids. There are often army officers that accompany the Israeli kids to the death camps. And the army officers were saying, so my Palestinian friend said to me that we created the state of Israel and we have the strong Israeli army to make sure that this doesn't happen again, never again, that we won't go by sheep to the slaughter. And my Palestinian friend said to me, at that moment, I understood that in the eyes of the Israeli kids, my friend, the Palestinian, I am the present reincarnation of the Nazis. The Israeli army expends its power and its energy to make sure that I, Palestinian from Bethlehem, don't do to the Jews what the Germans and Nazis did to them. And my Palestinian friend said, I then understood this conflict between Israel and Palestine. Part of the conflict, I'm not saying the whole thing, a small part of the conflict, one element of the conflict is that Jews are traumatized and afraid. We can't trust the Palestinians because we see in the Palestinians another version of the Nazis, another version of the Russian Cossacks, another version of the Inquisition, another version of the expulsion from Spain. We expect it to happen, so we have to be strong against it, and we can't trust them. We can't trust them. And this comes from grandparents, but it's not just from grandparents. It's a small part of it. It's a major element of Jewish Israeli consciousness. I have a Jewish educator who told me that once the following: it's hard not to be paranoid when everyone's against you. In other words, it sounds like paranoia, but it's true, or at least that's the Jewish experience, that it's true. So how do we make peace? How do we trust? How do we go into peace agreements with this deep, 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 deep trauma?
Yeah, so on the Palestinian side, the Nakba, the catastrophe of 1948, is something that we still feel like we are even living until now, and we are living the impact of it until now. The Nakba for us is that this point at history in where we were supposed to become a nation, we were supposed to become, we were supposed to have our independence, we were supposed to have our state and be sovereign, and we lost all that, and we lost most of our lands, and we became refugees in other countries, even in Arab countries around us. We are refugees and we are treated as refugees. And for example, in this war, I will share with you a story. When the Israeli army asked the people in the north to actually leave the north of the Gaza Strip and move to the south, and they were bombing, which actually was very difficult to move almost 1.1 million people from that area to the south. And there is nowhere to go. One of my friends actually, he said, I asked him, like, you know, the bombing was really intense and was really scary. I was watching every night on the news channels, and I was like thinking, if I was there, I mean, it was like really scary. You don't know. Your house might get bombed, and you are inside, and then the entire building will fall upon on you. So I asked this family, like my friend, why you don't leave? And they said, and they live actually in the center of Gaza, and there was bombing near their area. And they said, like, to leave where exactly? Where to go? We have nothing in the south. We have no relatives, no friends. We have nothing there. We are going to stay in the outside. We are going to sleep in the streets. And so one of the stories that happened, for example, is that when some people were evacuating, going to the south, there were many families. There were like children, women, and there were elderlies and people who actually have lived and experienced 1948. And in the Palestinian side, it felt again like after 70, 75 years, the same people are experiencing on the same land. They are experiencing an exile and displacement again, and they are becoming refugees. And actually, I actually remember one of these conversations in where, like, there was a young woman. She said, like, I always blamed my grandparents for leaving Jaffa. Why they had to leave? They should have stayed there, and they were too afraid, and they just left, and we lost our home there. But she said, now after what we experienced in Gaza, now I understand why they left. Because if they didn't live, probably I wouldn't be alive. And as I said before, in a previous answer, the Palestinians have a lot of suspicion about this war and what's really the purpose and the intent behind it. And as I said before, like, even if we left to like Egypt, or the Palestinians in Gaza left to Egypt, they would not be allowed to come back. And if this will be a second catastrophe.
So we spoke a lot about what's happening right now, but what is your hope for your country in the future? Do you have a specific vision in mind for what peace would look like, or what a resolution would be?
Yeah. I mean, like, I'm thinking about this all the time because I feel like this is what I can, as an activist and working in peace, this is what my mind is all the time busy about. We had several wars between Hamas and Israel before, and each war have ended with a ceasefire, and we go back again to some sort of like an unwritten agreement between both sides, and we go back to the managing of the conflict. I think this war should end with a political agreement. This one should end with a political agreement that will end the conflict between the Israeli and the Palestinian side. And my hope for that to happen is that there will be, that even though this is very difficult on my side, over 16,000 people were killed, over 30,000 people were injured so far, and there are many, many atrocities. And for some, or for many people, it doesn't matter. Like, people lost their house, their homes, their families, their fathers and mothers and their children. And there are children who lost their families. And actually, there were so many casualties in this war, and there were so many children who were left with no parents, that now people are starting to talk about actually adoption. like, because there are so many kids in Gaza without parents. And this is like really a big thing in the Palestinian society. So I hope that first of all that we start to think that we need to take responsibility, and by we I mean the people, both the Israelis and Palestinians, and not just leave it for the leadership. And that somehow something will happen on the Israeli society and the Israeli side that will change this leadership. Because I think that the leadership in Israel right now is not the leadership that's going to lead to peace. And you can say the same thing about the leadership on the Palestinian side. I think it must be changed. I think we need a lot of reform and a lot of work to do also on the Palestinian side, on the Palestinian leadership. I hope also that which is like, it's really hard for me to say that, but this is what I hope and I wish for. But the way how many countries are involved in our conflict is basically for their own benefit, of course, and in a way it's inflaming the conflict. And instead of actually de-escalating it, and it's instead of leading to a peace agreement, it's using the conflict and inflaming it. And at the end, the people here, the innocent people are dying, and innocent people are being killed. My hope is that there will be some change in the U.S. politics toward Israel and Palestine, and there will be more seriousness in becoming a serious and fair peace mediator. I think that we need someone from outside to help us. I don't think that right now the Israelis and Palestinians can on our own achieve an agreement. And I think that any agreement would require hard concessions on both sides. But if we want to have a better future and if we want to save more lives, we have to do it. It's not about land. It's never about the land itself. It's about identity and recognition. I think there is a way for us to move forward. We were able to do it at Roots for the last 9 years. We have created this model, and there are other models. If you want to search for the Israeli-Palestinian groups and joint spaces that created, some even focused on creating political models and actually making creative solutions, and some worked on the ground level, like us, like Roots. And so this is my hope. I hope that there will be a political process, that there will be a role for us, that we will be able to make reform on each side and to come up with a new leadership that will fight for peace.
I'll just add to what Noor said. I agree with everything he said. That in order to reach a peaceful solution, each side has to recognize the humanity of the other side, the identity of the other side, the legitimacy of the other side, and the other side's belonging to the land from the river to the sea. From the river to the sea is historical Palestine. From the river to the sea is historical Israel, the land of Israel. Both sides belong to the same land. You could say that Mother Earth, the land between the river and the sea, has two children, the Israelis and the Palestinians. We both belong to her. And we have to find a way to live together through recognition of the other side's belonging. Just as I belong, they belong. Which means there has to be, to some degree, Palestinian sovereignty. Just like there's Jewish sovereignty, there has to be Palestinian sovereignty. It could be in the framework of one state that's divided into different federal unions, like the United States. And on the other hand, Noor and I tend to go in the direction of a modified two-state solution in which Palestine is a completely independent sovereign state, but it's not separate from Israel. It's intertwined with Israel by a confederation, not a federation, but a confederation, something like the European Union. You have independent Israel, it's independent Palestine, but they're part of a larger union and a confederation. And in addition to the organs of confederation, there are two, let's say, lower levels of intertwining between the two states. Number one, open borders. Number two, open residency. Open borders means you can move from one side to the other, Israelis and Palestinians. And open residency means that you can have citizenship in one country and live your whole life as a resident of the other country. Palestinians can have Palestinian citizenship, whether they're born in Ramallah or born in Los Angeles or in Paris, come and get Palestinian citizenship, and then live their whole life, not just in Palestine, but they can live their whole life in Israel, not getting Israeli citizenship, Palestinian citizenship and Israeli residency. An Israeli can be born in the country or come from New York or Paris and get Israeli citizenship, I mean a Jew, and then live their whole life in Israel or live their whole life in Palestine with Israeli citizenship, but Palestinian residency. And the reason this solution appeals to me, I think same thing for Noor, is because it satisfies two conflicting needs of both sides. What I mean is both sides want their own state and both sides want the whole land from the river to the sea. And you can't give both of those things to both sides. It's a contradiction. But what we just said, the confederated solution, gives both sides their state and gives both sides enough of the connection to the land between the river and the sea that's not part of their state, enough of the connection so they feel that their identity, their historical homeland has not been taken from them. This plan is called Two States, One Homeland, and it's advocated by a political movement called A Land for All that works in Israel and in Palestine. They also have a Friends movement in the US. And of course, to create such a peace settlement, you need recognition and you need trust. And that goes back to the grassroots work of Roots to bring the two sides together.
Wow, thank you both for coming and for giving this dialogue. This is also the first time I feel like I've heard of this solution. We always hear about like the two states and what the difference of that could be, and maybe one person takes this land, one person takes that land, but this is a completely new concept to me. So we always think it's really important for our audience to at least get the last idea or the first idea that comes to your mind, but the last thing you want to leave them with for this episode and just for the future. So we'll say a brief sentence like take a deep breath, and then each of you can say one statement that you want to leave the audience with.
I think that we need solidarity between humans.
Thank you.
Don't choose a side, choose both sides.
The recording has stopped.